Hi, everyone, and welcome to Big Business This Week. I'm Dave Briggs on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. The polls are neck and neck in these final few days before the election. On the surface, a few thousand votes in Pennsylvania will decide who wins the White House, and tallying those votes will likely drag on several days after November 5th, so buckle up. But a completely different picture is being painted by the presidential betting markets. The what? Yes, those are now a real factor here. Does money talk when it comes to the presidential election? Zach Montalero is from Politico. He joins us now. Zach, this is a very different dynamic than we've ever become accustomed to ahead of an election. Why is betting a central factor for the first time in 2024?
Yeah, so for the first time, federal courts cleared the way for this betting to happen. Betting still remains fairly regulated in the U.S., even though it doesn't feel like that if you're watching a sporting event. And there's been attempts and small markets in the past, in past elections, to set up a political betting market. And just this year, basically, federal courts kind of cleared the way. So now, for the first time, we don't just have one pseudo-academic site running betting markets. We have larger players kind of in the field and more people getting involved. And we've seen a lot of money go into this, small in the scale of, Vegas betting or sports betting, but, historically pretty big.
Yet tens of millions of dollars have poured in the last couple of weeks. There are mainly three big options: Polymarket, Kalshi, and now Robinhood, allowing you to bet on the election outcomes. And while the polls, as I mentioned, are consistently close across the board, in particular in swing states, the betting markets are not. Polymarket has a 67% chance of Trump winning, Kalshi 62%, and Robinhood also an identical 62% chance of Trump winning. In your estimation, why?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I guess the idea behind these betting markets, right, is that there's a lack of data out there, or reliable data with polling, which I think we can quibble with. But money talks. That's the expression, money talks. And is it talking differently? Maybe. Do these traders have any more inside information? I'm going to venture no, right? What private polling is showing for both the former president and vice president's campaign is that this race is close. It's just how these people are manifesting themselves. And while there is a historical investment in these markets, at the risk of stereotyping a little bit, what we have seen so far, especially going back in past elections, political gamblers in particular, were younger men. Younger men right now are Trump supporters. So is that tilting the markets one way or the other? Maybe. These markets are still fairly small in the grand scheme of things. And they tell you something interesting. And, while they do have Harris trailing more than Biden, what they're showing is still not exactly a coin flip, but it's also not a runaway victory either. 62%, for example. That means Harris wins 4 out of 10 times. I think it's probably a little bit closer than that, but that's not that far off from a coin flip either.
Yeah, this is not sports betting where Las Vegas sets a point spread based on their estimation how the game goes. I think you may have just nailed it, though, Zach. I think it may be the gender gap, because those betting markets are almost identical to the gender gap in this election. And look, it is not stereotyping to say most investors of that kind are male. I am surrounded by, I would guess, 95% men here at the New York Stock Exchange, most of whom tend to lean a bit to the right. So what does drive these markets? Is it simply people throwing money in, not necessarily saying who they think is going to win, but who they want?
Yeah, that's certainly probably part of it. We saw some reporting earlier this year that Polymarket, I believe it was Polymarket, saw tens of millions coming in from overseas. Why? Good question. Why are these whales coming in from overseas? And what I think about, too, is also, and that's not implying any foreign interference, just implying that people want to make money. Yeah. And I think about back to Predict It, which was kind of the OG political betting market that operated under kind of an academic auspices in past elections. Those markets were the wild, wild west. People were trying to post fake polls just for a moment to spike the result for a moment so they can just make a little bit of profit. So it's different. It's different than a poll. It's different than people actually voting on election day. You don't have to wait for your contract to resolve in many of these markets, at least, to make your money. You can get in at 53 cents and sell at 55. And if you do that at a high enough volume, you've just made some money. That's different than voting on election day. That's different than voting at a poll.
Yeah, we saw even one large crypto bet actually move the betting markets, one particular person. So take them perhaps with a grain of salt. But polls undercounted Republicans in 2016. They overcorrected in 2020. What's your sense of where the polls are in terms of their accuracy this time around?
The cop-out answer is that it's going to be close, and that's not a fair thing to say, but that's true, right? The New York Times did a great great roundup on this recently that showed that if polling error is the same now that it was in 2020, Trump effectively sweeps the swing states. I think he might lose one of them. But if polling error is the same now as it was in 2022 in the midterms, Vice President Harris effectively sweeps the swing states. And that's all just changes within the margin of error. We've seen kind of a curious thing that we've had so many polls showing that the race is 1 point, in either direction in all of these swing states. I think folks should expect the polls to be close. There's maybe some concerns about herding, which is pollsters kind of matching. They don't want to be the outlier, so they all kind of, can weigh different ways. But what you think about the polls right now is that it's going to be close. Polling is a science, but it's also an art. And pollsters can make good faith adjustments to their data and end up with very different results. That doesn't mean they're trying to cook the books. It just, every election is different. So trying to weigh the population, to pass vote count, to pass vote recollection, to will you actually vote? This is a question that many polls ask is, will you vote? And people will say yes and maybe not vote, or people will say no and maybe do vote. It's all just trying to balance that art and science. But right now, it's close. I wouldn't put any money on it. We just talked about betting markets. It's a coin flip. It's basically a coin flip right now in most of the swing states.
Yeah, it certainly is. I think it's going to come down to turnout, in particular, if young people vote in large numbers, and they were just 50%, that was up dramatically. If they can overexceed that, that's going to be a huge factor there. So what are the final messages from both candidates? Is either one focused on the economy, which historically has been the central factor in every election?
Yeah, the real divide, too, is the messaging for the candidates. You kind of get two closing messages. You have their messaging on TV ads, which is where they're putting these hundreds of millions of dollars in the messaging the candidate is saying. For Harris, her message on her closing television ad message has been basically relentlessly focused on the economy. It's talking about Trump. It's talking about taxes, the cuts that he may or may not give. That's been her pretty universal closing message on TV ads. As we saw last night, her message, the one that she gives in the stump speech, is a little bit broader. It's talking about the future of the country, talking about American democracy. But the closing message we've seen for her in the TV ads is the economy. For Trump, what we see with him, his closing message right now has been immigration and some culture war stuff in the TV ads. And then his closing message from the candidate himself, well, that's all over the map. It's Donald Trump. When he's now been president, or he's now been in the political scene for years and years and years. For anyone to expect a cohesive, singular message from Donald Trump at this point, the individual at least, is kind of foolhardy. So yeah. His campaign ad message is different than what the guy himself is saying on the stage.
Even within a 5-minute time span, sticking to one message is just about impossible there. Then there's this last-minute issue that some feel could actually change the election. Madison Square Garden over the weekend, comedian Tony Hinchcliffe makes his comment about Puerto Rico being a floating island of garbage. And just when it seemed like this was going to be a huge win for the Harris side, Joe Biden inserts foot into mouth and appears to refer to Trump supporters as garbage. What's your take, and how might this play in Tuesday?
Yeah, I don't know if I believe in October surprises anymore, that one last-minute thing can change an election. And the White House maintains that Biden was talking very specifically about the Trump supporter who at that rally said the garbage comment. If you watch the video, Biden has always, let's say, had a halting way of speaking that kind of opens it up to interpretation. At this point, it's hard to find any voters out there who don't have a pretty solidly formed opinion of either President Biden or former President Trump. How much this actually moves people, we'll see. The real test will be, does anyone put this in their advertising? So far, in their national TV advertising, the big stuff that we all see, we haven't seen it yet. And I know, President Biden's comments just happened. It's how do they micro-target and how do they do that? That being said, again, if this moves people, this is on the margin. We are a closely divided nation. We're about as close to a 50-50 nation as you can get, and we're about as close to 50-50 in these important swing states. So even if any of these comments don't move large groups of people, do they move enough people, 10,000 people, 5,000 people, 1,000 people that could put a candidate over the edge? That's what matters.
Well, on one hand, you've got Puerto Rican voters make up 3.8% of the electorate in Pennsylvania, which is easily enough to sway the entire election if they all go in one direction, but that's a big if. And just for the record, less than 24 hours after the Biden comments, Trump was fundraising off of them, even though it was his rally that initiated the whole thing. So we are in truly bizarre times. I think one thing we all hope for is no violence. I am afraid that will not be the case. It does appear that those on the right, including President Trump, already have put out their allegations of cheating. I haven't heard those accusations from the left, but let's just hope America trusts in those results. Zach, it's going to be some tenuous times. Best of luck to you and everyone at Politico covering this election. Zach Montalero from Politico. Coming up, Apple Intelligence was finally released this week, but our next guest claims there's another upgrade. That was her favorite Apple release this year. Find out what it is and why it matters to you after the break. The long-awaited release of Apple Intelligence has finally arrived this week, with many iPhone users updating their devices and some rushing out to get the 16. But the bigger deal to millions of hearing-impaired Americans is AirPods being FDA approved as over-the-counter hearing aids. Here to talk more about that is editor at Tom's Guide, Kate Kozich. Kate, great to see you. This is a really interesting feature, and Apple has really leaned into health for a number of years now, but finally it appears they stuck the landing. What did the FDA say?
So there's actually two aspects of FDA authorizations that Apple has received. The first is for a hearing test that is on par with an audiogram that you would receive at an audiologist. The second part of that is the FDA first-time clearance for hearing aid software, for over-the-counter hearing aids specifically. And why that's a big deal is because that means that a product that is already out on the market can receive an over-the-air update to work as hearing aids.
That is remarkable. Now, big distinction here. There are new AirPods that came out. That's not what we're talking about, correct?
That's correct. You're referencing the Airpods 4 that launched in September. Those are not the model that are compatible with these new features. We're going to be looking at specifically the Airpods Pro 2 that released in 2022, that have already been out and that millions of Americans already have.
That is really interesting that they did not include it in the new update. Why is that? It's the seal that is different with the new versus these models.
I'll take it out so you can see. AirPods Pro 2 have a little silicone tip that create a perfect seal for active noise cancellation and creating a more balanced experience between what's happening in your ears and what's being picked up in your environment. And in order for hearing aids to work effectively, you need that true seal. So that's why. However, I'd like to point out that because AirPods Pro 2 have been on the market for several years now, they're not at the same $250 MSRP from launch. You can actually often find them under $200, which isn't that far off from the price of the AirPods 4 with active noise cancellation.
Even greater news for hearing impaired Americans. All right, tell us how this works, Kate.
So as I mentioned, we're going to start with the hearing test. And how that works is you're going to put the AirPods in your ear, as so. You'll hear the little chime letting you know that they're in effectively. And then in the settings of your iPhone, you'll see a section for AirPods. And there's this new section down here for hearing health specifically. You're going to want to take a hearing test. And we can't do it here on the floor because it's a little bit noisy. You're going to want to make sure that you're in a completely silent environment for this to work.
Just for the test, not for the actual usage. Okay?
Absolutely, just for the test. And to make things easy, your AirPods will actually be listening for the environmental sounds, and you won't even be allowed to start taking the test until it clears the sound and says you're all good, it's quiet enough.
Okay.
From there, you're going to go through a series of chimes, first starting with your left ear and then going to your right ear. It's about 2 to 3 minutes per each ear, and you're going to hear these chimes and tap the screen when you hear it. It's going to be different volume levels and different frequencies. And again, this is mimicking the exact experience that you would have if you were to take in a professional audiogram in an audiologist's office. After you've gone through and completed the hearing test, you'll get your hearing test results. Now, these are not my results right here. These are actually a friend that I worked with on creating some feature stories related to the hearing aid for the AirPods Pro 2. And if you can see, she has mild hearing loss. That is the most popular diagnosis for the 1.5 billion people worldwide who do suffer from hearing loss. And she knew that she had genetic hearing loss, but she never wanted to do anything about it. She thought that maybe it wasn't as high of a priority in health as some of other things, and I think that's maybe a common trend. So with this now, she knows that she has hearing loss. She knows that it's symmetrical. That's part of it too, because if you have asymmetrical hearing, which means different levels of hearing loss in your ear, the Airpods will be able to adjust from that. And from there, you're able to set up your hearing aid feature. Hearing aid feature, the hearing aid feature is automatically tuned based on your hearing test results. You don't have to do anything.
But you have to turn on a setting that is for hearing aids.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
So as I said, after you've just gone through that test, you'll be prompted right there to set up hearing aid. After that, your hearing aids are on. You can turn that feature off at any time if you want. There's even a toggle you can turn up using the little stems, increase the effectiveness or make it lower if that's something to your preference. And to make things even easier, right in the control center of your iPhone, well, you'll have your hearing aid settings right here. You don't have to go into another third-party app. That's something that if you buy another over-the-counter hearing aid from a brand like Sony or some other audio brands, you have to use a third-party app and go into that every time you want to make those changes.
So you needless to say, want to toggle this on and off, because if you're listening to music, if you're streaming a show, you'd be picking up conversations everywhere. You want to turn this setting on when you're having a conversation like we are?
No, actually, the setting has a media control option that you can enable, and that way it will know if you're watching something on your phone, listening to music, and it will prioritize that. Then there's a conversation boost setting. When it knows that you're having a conversation, it detects your jaw moving, it detects there's sound coming directly from you. It will then turn to focus on that specifically.
This is truly astonishing. Okay,
It really
so
is.
how would it work for your friend that has some hearing issues?
So as with any new time you're using a hearing aid or any medical device for that matter, there is going to be a learning curve. It may seem a little odd at first. And even when I tried it on her settings, we both noticed a little bit of reverb. But after we were sitting in a noisy cafe for 30 minutes, she said it felt completely natural, which amazed me. And she said she was actually very surprised to feel that she hadn't had to ask me once to repeat myself, which is not a common occurrence. And I say, quote, she said she would have to take a back seat in conversations in a noisy place like we were if you're out to dinner with your friends. And she would wait until people were in a more quiet environment to actually have a meaningful conversation. And she feels like she doesn't maybe need to do that anymore if she wears these out. And these aren't as much of like a faux pas. Like no one's gonna really judge you if you're out wearing your AirPods versus if you have, something that maybe looks like a hearing aid or you had to buy it at the store with a sign on the box that said over-the-counter hearing aid. I feel like there's a little bit more like a faux pas with that.
There was a ton of attention given the release of Apple Intelligence. Just your personal opinion, is this almost a bigger deal, a bigger evolution for Apple?
Hands down, this is my favorite thing that Apple has released this year. Apple Intelligence is great, but you're talking about having an iPhone 15 Pro or the new iPhone 16 in order to start using those features. That's actually a small percentage of the total amount of Apple iPhone users out there. So something like this, and I was actually at an event where my friend was interviewing Tim Cook. I overheard it a little bit, and she asked him about why he thinks Apple is able to, make these types of health innovations, and he said it was his top priority. He says he thinks that Apple is going to be making the biggest impact in the health space.
Great for Tim. Finally, I do want to ask you your thoughts on Apple Intelligence because you have played with it a little bit.
I have played with it a little bit. There are 3 key pillars there: the new Siri experience, the creative tools in the Photos app, and the ability to make emojis. And then the third part, and the part that I think people are maybe going to have the most immediate benefit from, are the new writing tools that are built into mail, text, etc. And it's going to transform how easy it is to summarize your Notes app or get a priority list of the emails that have been sent to you that day, because who has time to shift through, 400, 500 emails in the morning. The other great part of that too is if you're not sure how to respond to emails, you'll get some suggestions, and you'll even be able to change the tone of your message to fit the type of conversation you're having.
Okay, so that does actually excite me and think I need to get this new iPhone. You'll have to wait for that Genmoji that's reportedly coming with the next software update. Kate, this has been really informative, really interesting. Kate Kozich is from Tom's Guide. Check them out, tomsguide.com, and that's where you'll find all of her pieces about these incredible hearing aids from Apple. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back, everybody, to Big Business This Week. Peter Green writes the BBTW newsletter, and he joins us now with some big stories in business. Peter, good to see you. We are getting a glimpse at Starbucks' new CEO, Brian Niccol's plans to try and turn around the struggling coffee giant, both in stores and corporate offices. What are you learning?
Well, he's taking a multi-pronged approach, and I'm not sure how much some of his employees are going to like it, particularly at the corporate level. In the stores, this may go over pretty well. So corporately, he has joined the return to work, return to office wave. He said people have to be in the office 3 days a week. Earlier, he'd said you should be where you can do your work best. And he said, I think that means the office, but I guess people didn't believe him. It's kind of ironic given that Niccol himself lives in Newport Beach, California, and flies up on a corporate jet 1,000 miles once or twice a week to be in the office. So we'll see how that flies with the rest of the company. The other big issue is how do they get more people back into the stores? Sales are down 6%, I think, in volume. He's got to get more people back into the stores. He's got to get people buying more stuff. So Brian Niccol's come up with an idea: make Starbucks more comfortable again. He's giving the baristas back those Sharpies so they can write your name and your order on the cup, make it a little more personalized, even if they do mispronounce your name. And he's also bringing back the condiments bar so you can add your own cream and sugar. And then if you're going to lounge around in a Starbucks, which he is starting to remodel, they're going to give you ceramic cups to sip your coffee from. So looks like he's, starting to move on reinventing the company. No word, of course, on whether that back to office means that the executives can take their laptops into a nearby Starbucks.
That's an excellent point. I hadn't thought about that. Look, the return to office is happening. It started with Amazon. People are going back to work, whether we like it or not. They'll also stop charging for non-dairy milk like almond and my personal favorite, oat milk, which is a big deal for a lot of customers, saving them around 10%. I usually go with the all-black Trenta cold brew myself. Let's talk about Trenta Rich, Tesla CEO, the world's richest man, Elon Musk. He is also former President Trump's top donor, and that may or may not have something to do with slowing sales. What's the latest you're learning about their EV numbers?
Well, California has just reported that EV sales rose 2% in California, but Tesla's sales fell by 3.5%. That's about 12.6% down for the year. According to the California New Car Dealers Association, that's because people are sick and tired of the same old models. The Model Y is the top-selling EV in California year to date, but they lost 8.5% of market share compared to last year. I think people they're getting tired of that, and it's very clear from other reports and surveys that the main buyers of electric cars tend to be left-leaning, conservation-minded people who are probably also members of the Sierra Club. Musk has absolutely done himself no favors in winning their support with his backing for Trump. So I think that may be another reason that people are stepping away from Teslas if they want to move into EVs.
Going to be very interesting what happens Tuesday and moving forward with Elon. Our thanks to Cheddar's own Peter Green. Make sure to visit cheddar.com/BBTW to sign up for our Big Business This Week newsletter. Don't go away. More Cheddar up next.